Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Paul, thank you for having me on your show.
For people who have not read it yet, what's the story of Wounded Tiger?
Yeah, Wounded Tiger is the true story. It's actually an amazing true story of the pilot who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, whose life was changed by an American prisoner and by a girl he never met. If this were not true, it would not be a good story because it's just too far out. But it is true, and that's one of the really fun things about this journey.
And the meaning of the title is?
Well, Wounded Tiger is a metaphor. It represents the nation of Japan, who wanted to be one of the leading nations in the world, like the United States, Great Britain, France, and Germany, but they were kind of marginalized as a second tier, Bush League nation, and they resented that. So after World War I, there was the League of Nations, and they were a part of the League of Nations, and they proposed what's called the Racial Equality Act, and it was voted down primarily by President Wilson of the United States. And they are highly offended by that still in that day, they're saying some races are superior and some are inferior. So they were a wounded tiger. So a tiger is the biggest cat in the world. They're gorgeous, they're powerful, they have great potential, but a wounded tiger cannot reach its potential, and it's being held back, and it's a dangerous creature, and that's what you have in the nation of Japan. So in general, it's about Japan, but in specific, Fuchida himself, you may or may not know that when the Japanese achieved the surprise of the attack of Pearl Harbor, the code word back to the fleet that they had achieved surprise was Tiger, 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 or Tora, Tora, Tora. And I saw that movie years ago, and it's a pretty good movie, actually. So Fuchida himself wanted to be a great man and part of a great nation who was conquering and expanding like they saw other nations do. But instead, he ended up doing the exact opposite, destroying his nation, his homeland, and many other millions of lives were lost. And he was very much at fault for this. So he was as wounded a tiger as you can be. But there is a transformation that happens in this story, and it's really positive. It's really encouraging, and it's authentic as well. But ultimately, Paul, everyone is a wounded tiger. We all have potential for great things and beauty and power and accomplishing things, but we can't do it if we're wounded by the choices we've made, by things that others have done to us, and we feel we'll never be who we are supposed to be. We can't be that triumphant tiger. And this story is saying, actually, yes, you can. It doesn't really matter. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. And you'll see this happen multiple times throughout the story. So you can be the person that God made you to be. And here's how it happens.
So we can't blame Woody Wilson for what happens to us.
Nope, we make our own choices. In fact, sometimes the worst things that happen to you, like maybe your brothers sell you into slavery, turn out really, really good. You just have to give it time and not become bitter and angry, shake your fist at God, but say, okay, Lord, what is happening and why is it happening? So in this story of Wounded Tiger, there's three main plot lines. Mitsuo Fuchida, who was handpicked by Admiral Yamamoto to lead the Pearl Harbor attack, and he was glad to do it, talks about it as like the happiest day of his life. He's about 50% of the story. Then there's a guy named Jake DeShazer who joined the Army because he needed a job. He ends up volunteering, coming almost accidentally for the Doolittle raid, attacking Japan, bailing out of a plane running out of fuel over occupied China, becomes a prisoner of war of the Japanese. And then there's the Covell family, a mother, father, and their three kids in Japan who flee to the Philippines. They were teachers and missionaries and send their kids back to the US. But to get back to your point, Jake DeShazer was in prison and beaten and tortured. His friends are dying of starvation. Some are shot. I mean, it's just a mess. And he finds himself, in his own words, crazy with hatred toward the Japanese. And it's at that point he says, you know what? I don't want to live this way. I don't want to live in hatred all day long. And he thought about his mom. So this is, a tip of the hat to moms across the nation, around the world. You have a tremendous amount of power and influence in your family. Even if you think that nobody pays attention, they do. And what he thought in that dark, smelly, hopeless jail cell was, my mom had faith in God and she had joy. I want that kind of joy myself. But he didn't know what to do. He had no mentor, no discipler, no nothing. So he eventually got a hold of a Bible being passed around, and he just voraciously consumed it. And God says that he's a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. And that's exactly what happened in Jake DeShazer's life. the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which gets brighter and brighter to full day. So when you first hear the truth, it's kind of like a match going off in a pitch black room. You feel like, wow, I got it figured out. Well, yes, but that's just the beginning. And that's what you see in Jake DeShazer's life. And you see this transformation in his life, all these insurmountable, hopeless situations throughout the story that happen one after another gets transformed one at a time. And that's an amazing thing to witness. And it's an encouraging process for really anyone.
And these transformations do not happen just like that.
Mhm.
It took Jake a long time. It took Mr. Fushida a long time to come around.
Yeah, it takes all of us a long time.
And it takes a lot of work.
But here's the thing that's interesting about Fuchida. He was not interested in Christianity or God or the gospel or eternal things or anything else. He was prepared to die just the way he was. He didn't care. What happened, what confounded him was when he saw Peggy Covell, he only heard about this, about her loving her enemies in a very dramatic way, which I cannot give away, of course, but he started asking, where does this love come from? Because he grew up and it was steeped in all of society that as a nation, the principle is you take revenge against your enemies. You don't love your enemies, you destroy your enemies. So I thought, where does this love come from? How could you do this kind of thing? It seems impossible, and it really is impossible on our own, in our own strength. So as he started seeking that, he eventually he got a Bible and he started reading it, but he was not interested in becoming a Christian at all. Zero. He was just curious what happens. And as he started getting into this world, he started realizing, wow. And then, of course, he became convicted of the things he had done, which were horrific and impacted his nation to this day, are impacted negatively by his choices. But on the flip side of the coin, once he gave his life to God and put him in charge, Fuchida's life has now been transformed into being a catalyst to change lives for good. And that's what happens in the story of Wounded Tiger.